Yay. All right, the meeting has started. Okay, so I guess the first thing is meeting invite. I think this will be the meeting invite going forward. It does allow me to record, which is the main feature that I didn't have the last time we were looking for a meeting invite. So apparently I've been given permission to use those resources. So yeah, this should work. Hopefully both Jock and I have the capability to add people, which means at least it's not one person. So yeah, that's the meeting invite. We can skip pending reviews for now. As usually stuff we put at the end in our agenda. So let's talk about ergonomics.
Yeah, I guess this is more of a announcement or question thing where I'm working on a work example of federated query planning for the calcite meetup that's happening in February. And I'm kind of using Isthmus for the first time for first principles about looking at our internal code base. And there's definitely stuff in there where it's just like, some of these names could be better. Some of this stuff could be split off to make it easier to use. I'm kind of keeping track of that. Those might be changes I want to make. However, some of them would be breaking. So like renaming stuff to be more findable and kind of splitting out things to not be. I think we have a converter class that's kind of like goes from SQL directly to Substrate, and that could probably be two modular things where you inject one of them and make it a bit more usable. So I'm just keeping track of stuff, and this is kind of more testing the waters of if I make some breaking changes that kind of improve IMO, the overall health of stuff, would be any like opposition to that.
It's a very general question.
Yeah, I guess it's still like I haven't made
breaking
changes in a while. There's some small stuff where it's like, for example, we have like a substrate to calcite class, which goes from substrate to calcite, and then we don't have a calcite to substrate class. We have a substrate relevance class. I'm like, that's.
Oh, you're talking about breaking changes to calcite / isthmus, not.
Yeah, isthmus specifically, not the core spec, just like the library and stuff like that. Yeah, making the library more usable, the core spec.
I've not heard of anyone using isthmus in production, so to speak. It's been more of just like a debug tool as far as I've known. What's that?
Yeah, I guess aside from like us, there's someone in the database internals. No, that's not one of the discords I'm in was from CMU, was looking at isthmus for some stuff, and they also ran into some pain points like onboarding. I want to factor that in, but I've just seen a couple of complaints about it being hard to use, and some of that might be calcite, some of that might be isthmus. So I might try to address some of those pain points, and that might require some small breaking changes in like the Substrate Java library, not the core spec. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to test the waters and make that explicit before I do anything too major.
It's perfect already.
Oh, hello, Jax. I've been looking at a lot of calcite internal code. I'm like, why is it like this? And I'm like, Jax 8 years ago. I'm like, okay. No, it's good.
Yeah, it's really depressing when you are working on some code and then you look at who did this shit, and then like 10 years ago you did it. You're like, oh.
Admittedly, I also did that to myself. I can get isthmus this weekend, just being like, who did this? Why did I do it? Oh, I'm like, this was me.
I mean, kudos for stuff still being active after 8 years.
Yeah, exactly.
The only thing I see that's 8 years old is like a Stack Overflow question. Someone will comment to be like, well, what about this? And it's like, I don't even know what this question could be written by someone else for all I know.
That's funny.
Yeah, that's kind of it for my discussion item.
I think I heard the tail end of what you're saying, Victor, and I feel, having been working very closely with Substrate Go, every time I work with Substrate Go, I just want to kill myself. That's probably understated, but
you can make your tools better. You have full capacity.
You don't actually. You just assign it to somebody else who wants to kill themselves.
Yeah.
Is that like a Go issue, or is that just like there's not enough scaffolding yet?
I would say that generally speaking, I feel like the first version of that was written to be written quickly, not like, and so I feel like there's just patterns around like, things that are either half thought through or half completed. And so like there's a builder, but like the ergonomics of the builder are really rough, and there are several builders, and yeah, it's just and symmetry is very challenging. Like David's complaining because I signed a ticket to him yesterday, which was, hey, I have this object. I now want to take and create a new version where I change one thing, and it's impossible because the stuff is not exported, and the builders don't expose an API that allows you to build it the way that it's exposed. So you're just like, I can't, like, I want to replace some with some zero to refer to calcite for you, and I can't do it. It's like impossible.
And this also gets extra fun when you start to factor in like, oh, okay, how do I handle the protobuf any's embedded in stuff? I need to periodically have hooks in the consumers to handle that, and basically any extension types. And yeah, I think Substrait Java had a similar thing. Like the version when I first started using it was like, it did the core stuff, but I needed to do more, and it just hit it with a hammer. And I don't think we've committed to 1.0 realistically for any of our libraries, and as long as we make the changes in a way that people can like keep up with us, it's probably fine.
Yeah, except Substrate.
That's 1.0 in like a number, but not in spirit.
Well, it's worse. I didn't even realize this. David pointed this out, and I was in denial of it for an extended period of time. But like in Go, if you do a major version bump, you have to change all the imports.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Ah.
And so not only are we stuck on version 3, but like we don't want to bump it ever again because otherwise we have to go through a bunch of lot files and change the imports. So it's like doubly awesome. Let me just say.
Okay, we might need to fix that to not be major version bumps every time. That if it's going to be that painful for people to upgrade stuff.
Yeah, we just don't do breaking changes anymore.
Okay.
Let's just say that it's kind of rough right now. I think that yes, you were right, Vector, when you said a year ago, like, hey, we should stay on 1.0. If I had known about this fucking stupid import bullshit, I would have agreed with you. I did not know about that. I was not Go literate enough. Because I generally feel the way that I did then, which is like, who cares about version numbers? Like the fact that Substrate's on version 53, I'm like, great, who cares? Or whatever version we're on these days.
It's 0.53.
Yeah, it's 0.53. But people just drop the 0 once you're at 53. I mean, come on. It's just 53. Anyway. So, Victor, you were wrong, but you're right in this one case.
Okay, I'll take that as a win.
Picoseconds. Oh.
Yeah, we're going to talk about picoseconds. So there's a PR. Somebody wants to add picoseconds to timestamp, the precision time and timestamp, which seems pretty easy, but hasn't gotten close to enough reviewers.
Who uses picoseconds?
Who was it?
I'm sorry.
Did he actually say it? You see, there's a discussion in Slack. He does not mention it in the PR.
I don't see any reason not to include it if someone can do it. It just means some systems will be like, yeah, we can't handle picoseconds, but
yeah, and then I think as a side effect, they noticed.
I'm only trying to say, like, let's make sure that there's a system that doesn't do it. Like, I agree with you if there's a system that does it.
There
if
is
it's
a
like,
system
hey,
that
I just wanted to patch an open source system to have some patch cred. Like,
No, there was a specific discussion.
For
maybe we should just copy paste that
duration or
Slack into.
timestamp?
I'm looking for it.
Yeah,
This
Trina
is
supports
also-
Trina. Yeah.
Trina supports picoseconds?
Yeah.
Sadly, we cannot reject something just for being unreasonable.
You know, most machines don't
Can't do it.
support like anything near that resolution. Like, have you seen a clock chip on a motherboard that supports anything close to that resolution? Like, what system is spitting out accurate picoseconds?
When I worked
Maybe
for
That's a separate question of whether
Weston's like, well, when I worked for this
support
company
picoseconds.
that spent $7 million for each clock chip, they were able to get picoseconds.
yeah, the Keysight did. Eventually, they were doing quantum testing and basically physics testing, and they needed femtoseconds. But they
here's
would be
my
the
point.
first to say
You
they
need
want
timestamp.
duration and not timestamp. Like,
Yeah,
a
like
femtosecond
that's
timestamp is meaningless.
yeah. I'm just like, come on. Like, it was on this day at exactly this moment in time. I'm like, yeah, sure it was. Sure it was. Like how do you keep like what is it NTC? What's the network clocking protocol stuff?
They had their
Like,
own.
I don't think
actual-
that supports checking whether or not you're a picoseconds within correctness. All right.
Yeah. No,
When I
it
worked
would
at a
not
different
be able-
company, we replaced NTP with a different thing that could go down to nanoseconds.
NTP. That's it. Yeah. You replaced it with what?
They had their own NTP that could do nanoseconds.
Yeah, I was supportive of nanoseconds, but like let's not go crazy.
The other problem with that they noticed is that when they were trying to add tests for this changed behavior, which is really good, they noticed that existing test cases don't align with the documentation.
So the test cases are wrong.
Okay, so we can just go fix. I'm sure that those test cases are written based on probably DuckDB and data fusion behavior. So,
Well, there's a real argument to be made that there should just be two functions. Why don't we just write two functions? There's extract that returns milliseconds, and extract that returns microseconds, or whatever it is. Like,
yeah.
it's different it's different resolution, right? It's extract with
Yeah,
different.
one of them
return types.
is returns all of the microseconds, and one of them returns just the microseconds since the last millisecond.
Yeah. Anyway, so to me, it just seems like it's two functions.
Yeah.
So we should probably just make two functions if we need two functions.
Okay. I will suggest
I don't
something like that. Okay, that's the picosecond problem. The other one is dynamic parameters, which we've discussed before. Somebody has a PR to add them fairly simply. I think the one thing that I was interested in clarifying was the way that where you would pass the dynamic parameters to the plan. I could see two ways of the two ways of doing it. One would be to have a separate object that we would pass, which would be fully typed, not like in SQL you would just pass strings and then you have to convert them. But with Substrate, we should already be given the real types. So there would be basically a list of typed literals coming in. But the other place would do it would be to actually put it in the root and say, here are the dynamic parameters to use for this plan. Disadvantage there would be that you would have to modify the plan every time you wanted to use it, which makes it harder to treat it as read-only or something like that.
There's also a question of
But
like,
plan
if you're
caching
doing it-
becomes rewrite every time.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing. It's like if you're using this for plan caching, do I actually want to be sending the plan every time, or do I want to be like send my dynamic plan, and then whenever I want to use it, I'm like the other side an ID with like the plan parameters. Like I actually don't know if it makes sense to. Actually, does it make sense to have a plan with dynamic parameters where you include the parameters in the plan? Because at that point, you might as well just inline them. I guess for
the reason is you have a plan that doesn't have them filled in, and so it's an unqualified plan or something like that. And then you have the one where you actually fill in the parameters so that it's usable. So you would like save the one where it isn't filled in, and then you would, when you give it to be executed, you'd have the one that was filled in, and that would not change the interface for anybody to use it. I mean, they would still be just to take a plan. They wouldn't need a separate data structure to also be sent. And that's the only reason I have why I would think of putting it in the plan.
Yeah, well, I mean, I
the
think
trade-offs.
Rick Victor, to your comment, like not having to rewrite all of the expression trees and all of the relations when I want to bind, to me is a win.
Yeah, and I guess then
Right.
you can cache the plan of dynamic expressions, and then you just have to like get the cache plan and inline it once.
Yeah, I think it's okay to send the plan multiple times. I don't think that you're trying to save that time. I think you're trying to save the processing of the plan, and the rewriting of the plan.
That makes sense. The one thing I did comment on that PR is like, do we want to use index-based like lookup, or should we just use names to bind things? I feel like more readable and less likely to screw up the indexing.
With names is then you're going to worry about someone remembering that you already used that name
In your plan.
Yeah.
If it's a map. Well,
Yeah, if you have like
the same
it's
problem with numbers too, but
well,
I mean, let me clarify that. It means like yeah, I mean, I guess you're right. I kind of feel like there is more semantics that need to be applied on top of the system if it's a string-based system, is my main feeling. But like now it's like, okay, do we match case?
we do what we do already for function engine. Just say no, it's case sensitive. Like, don't change anything. I think I'm just thinking about it. If I'm looking at a dynamic plan and it's like, cool, I have something equals 1. It's like, okay, is that supposed to be like the user ID or the customer ID? I suspect that.
Well, the problem, Victor, the one problem I have is that many systems don't have names for them. So now you can just have a bunch of junk names. You have 1.
I
2,
mean,
3.
at that point, you could just use 0, 1, 2 as strings. Like, if your system can't generate good names, then you can throw numbers in there anyways. So
Yeah.
you can use 0, 1, 2, 3 as valid names. Like, I don't care. It just means that if I have the metadata, or I have like a system that's smart enough to be like, oh, I want to name this dynamic parameter for like debugging purposes, that I can.
I'd be more inclined to just have an optional field, which is, whatever, memo. But I don't know. Like, rather than using that as the binding variable, like I'm a database guy. Like, you don't make a foreign key be a string. Like that just seems bad. Victor's like, no, I do all the time. I love strings as my foreign keys.
A foreign key.
Like whatever, like customer ID. I don't make customer ID be a string. I want it to be an integer. Like,
yeah, but variable names, column names and variable names are typically strings. So if we're taking the analog of having
we don't believe in names, though. Remember, Substrait, we don't believe in names.
I do agree that it would be much more readable to look at if you were looking at the plan and having the dynamic plan that said this is the name. It would
I don't have.
But you're right. You don't necessarily need
I
to.
mentioned it in
it's
the
this weird
PR,
thing where it's like we're into. What's that?
I mentioned it in the PR. People can comment on it, and we can go from there.
Yeah. Whoever wants to die on a hill can die on a hill. I'm not going to die on that hill.
I haven't seen the PR much, but I was just wondering, like, for the index approach, like, would that be of whatever inputs are coming in, or would that be specifically of the operator on which, like, the dynamic parameter is in?
It would be. So my assumption is it's the same as reference rel. Reference rel says, reference rel says 4, and then it's the fourth relation in the root plan. And so I would be assuming the same thing. It would be like this random node in this random tree is like a dynamic parameter expression, and then in the root it would be like it'd say like 4, and then you go to the root and it'd be like, here's the list of dynamic parameter values, and 4 would be defined as 32, whatever.
Right. So like referencing something in the like relations list or vector or whatever.
But it'd be a separate vector, right? It would be a separate from relations.
Like just for dynamic parameters.
parameters.
Yeah. Okay. I think if it's something like that, then like, you don't lose context as much when you're like passing the plans around, so that it's you don't find yourself in a place where you have to like walk the plan and like resolve some things in order to figure out like, oh, which one is that, right? I think that's the thing you'd want to avoid.
I guess you sort of do, mostly because I'm the one. I spend all the time looking at the JSON plans and having to do the lookups in my head for index stuff is fine, like functions is fine, but
yeah, like that's my main thought is about consistency. I don't have a strong opinion beyond that. It's that like our functions are looked up by number, and our reference rows are looked up by number.
yeah,
Like our anchors are.
for consistency.
So I think of this as an anchor, if you will.
Yeah, that could be that could be an anchor. You can make a case for an anchor.
Yeah, anchor's good.
But I'm super supportive of I think David's comment that that the plan should have the resolutions in it. Right, like the patch doesn't propose that, right? It only proposes the the placeholders.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think having both would be useful because if you have both, we can look at like what the lookup scheme looks up and the readability to make the argument for ergonomics from the whole thing. I like the idea of using them as anchors, actually. That seems like it could be good.
I just had to say the word anchor, and then he's off the name thing. Yay!
No, yeah, everything's an anchor. It's like, okay, you know what, consistency.
Yeah, then you're going to respond, and you're going to be like, wait a minute. If you think about HTML, an anchor is string based. It's not numeric based. Shit.
That's the name overload, and between Substrait and HTML is a different problem. They're using it wrong.
I don't think I've heard anyone say, oh, but in HTML, they also use this term.
That's fair point. Fair point. I don't think anybody in database engineering is. I still think we talk a lot about the relationship between database internals and HTML. That's a good point. That's this when I show that I have a job that has multiple hats, don't I?
All right. Well, that's all the items that we currently have on the list. Are there any other interesting items?
Did we ever get that one? So just as a reminder, if you guys don't remember, Jesus, the guy who proposed the dynamic parameters, he also proposed another patch recently, which was adding extension types to some subset of types. I don't remember what it was exactly. And I think we should go look at that one as well. But as a reminder, he's working at Microsoft on SQL Server, I think SQL Server. And they use Substrate internally, and they kind of forked some stuff and added some stuff. And so he's working on trying to incorporate that stuff back on the main so that Microsoft's on Substrate main. So I have been failing, but I have been trying to give his stuff extra attention because it would be great to have them more publicly contribute on a regular basis. And so I think he's trying to get the internal teams to contribute. And he's kind of bridged the hey, let's get onto main, and then we can all be collaborating together.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that are needing help. Yeah, I think there's add advanced extension to GDL write and update. That's I think the one you're talking about.
That one I'd love to see if anybody has any strong opinions, because that one's just been sitting there, and it's such an thing.
I don't really care.
They should all they should be consistent. That makes sense.
There's 17 comments on this thing.
Yeah, it's really sad. Like I think it's just not paying any attention. So people they do drive-bys. I've done drive-bys on that one. It's just
and he's updated the numbers, which I think was the only problem, and then it didn't get. People didn't come back after he updated the numbers, which was last week or something.
I would have approved them too.
We would update the branch, but otherwise, you can merge it.
Yeah,
I remember this now. Yeah, I think he just put 9 for everything, and some of them were like 0, 1, 2, 4. That's like, why are we jumping to 9? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Because we're not reserving.
He was trying to be consistent in his own way, or he was doing copy and paste, one or the other. But anyway, I think that's one place where I feel like it would be good for us to do better, because we should reward that behavior. Yeah. I feel like that's probably a thankless job at Microsoft. I mean, I don't know, but I'm guessing. So if we can be as facilitative as possible, it'd probably be good. Anything else?
Did make me think of something else related to that. It's like, well, we have like extended expressions, we have extended relations, and we have extension points and various things. Should we have an extended expression type? Like, should we just have an expression that's like do whatever you like in the same way we have like relations for it?
I have thought that that is a good idea. I was actually thinking that earlier today, strangely enough. I was working on something and I was trying to build a test case. An expression is a closed interface. You can't implement new implementations outside of the package. And so if you want to do a mock expression or like create an expression, sorry, I'm talking about Substrate Go specifically, but like I was trying to mock something up and I was just like, oh, why isn't there just like an advanced extension expression type so that I could do whatever I want with it?
Yeah, that's kind of
Yeah.
like thinking about it. Part of the reason I like having that in relations as well is that it means that people can self-serve their use case, and then if they figure out it's valuable or should be upstreamable, they can do it. But it provides an easy path for like do your thing quickly, and then upstream it and migrate to it. And not having it for expressions is just like, oh yeah, I guess like I could see cases for like, oh, if you want to work with dynamic text internally in a way that's consistent with the system, you can make an advanced or like a extended expression that's your dynamic type thing, and then once it's available, just kind of like merge it in.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea.
Okay.
It's funny that I was thinking about that this morning.
Very nice.
Indeed.
Nice. So I joined today because I am starting to get to a point where I've like almost hit some milestones for myself. So like I'm working on basically like, you know, being able to split a plan, a substrate plan, like before it gets to say like a DuckDB engine, so that I can decide like, kind of like, is this whole plan something I should send to this engine, or do I want to send a part of it, or do I want to communicate it remotely for some other device to like participate in the planning? So like, you know, I basically have this layer where I'm trying to like look at the plan, do some just like some minimal analysis to do that splitting. But anyways, so I've almost got like a prototype that can do this end to end. But what I was curious about is, so I'm doing a lot of this on C++. And so essentially where it kind of sits is kind of like, I made it something that, let me think about this, that because DuckDB also has its own linking to substrate libraries, like I made it something that DuckDB can link against so that I don't conflict with like their substrate libraries. And I've made it a separate library so that I can just have this as something that anybody can link against, and then separately, like the engine can be its own library. So part of what I'm curious about is, I know there's a Substrate CPP repository, and I think at the moment it's kind of more generating plans from, you know, you're not already in a protobuf type of scenario. And so I'm kind of just curious about like what you guys might be interested in, or like how I can fit in like this, you know, I don't know, thing into the community, right? So that was probably a little obscure, and I can be much more specific, but just thoughts so far, I guess.
Has anybody here even thought about the C++ recently? I think David's probably the one who's most recently worked with that code, if I recall correctly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's mostly the C++ stuff is about the text format, and there's a type library. It's certainly possible and reasonable to do other things in the repo. Yeah, splitting plans would be something that would be reasonable. We probably could have. There could be builders. There could be a lot of things that probably could go in Substrate CPP.
Yeah. So just a little more context. So basically, the way I'm working with it is like I just assume that there is some plan somewhere, right? And then the library can either read a plan that's like written to a file and just like print it out using the basic protobuf stringify stuff, or like as part of the splitting, right? Like what I do is like if I have some plan and I decide like, hey, here's an operator where I want to do a split, like I actually move it up to like a plan rel and then like put a reference rel in place. And then if I decide like, oh, actually like, you know, I want this whole plan, I want to undo that. Like I also have code to like swap it back down. Right. So like, you know, part of what I have in this is like, you know, let me walk the plan enough to get some information, but then like, how do I move things around so that, you know, I can kind of enable certain other things. Right. So, and then like, I've asked in the Slack before, like, how do I get kind of like at any particular operator, just like what the schema looks like at that point? Cause like, you know, it's not built in. But like, so that's another thing that I would like to add that I will have in there. So I just kind of like am building up this like kind of toolbox of, you know, what could eventually be kind of like static analysis of Substrate, like in C++, and trying to make it in a way that like other libraries can link against it. And like, I'm just saying that in terms of like, you know, I'm using DuckDB right now, but, and like Data Fusion Rust, but like ideally, you know, anybody who kind of wants to like play around with things early on, and like if they can link in C++, and like I'm trying to design it for that kind of use case, right? And like, you know, one of the things I had to do was like I had to put all of the protobufs I generated into a different namespace so that like if somebody isn't thinking about linking against my library, they're gonna have the default namespace kind of be used. And like I came out to an issue where like the default constructors were colliding. So anyways, like, you know, I was thinking like that's also a thing where like if we just have it in a different namespace, people can kind of just bring it up and that kind of thing. So that's kind of I think a little bit better explanation of like kind of what I'm thinking.
Yeah, it's definitely been a problem with the C++ library of trying to make it. You basically have to use its version if you're going to use it. It does actually have some code which will tell you what the schema is at any particular point because it's not exposed, but it's inside the parser because it has to conversion to text. It needs to figure out what the schemas are. So there's a little bit of that. There's a little bit of the IO stuff that you're talking about reading and writing the files because it's can rewrite to a text format, for instance. IO is one of the things that's implemented. So yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of things that are related, and I think specifically the part that is really interesting is the being able to separate and is doing the manipulation of the plans. And those are so it's like, oh, here's the plan object, here's your modified plan object. So those transformations are interesting.
I will say, as far as like making something generally useful that others can use, like unlike Arrow, there hasn't been like Substrate hasn't really been designed with there's a base implementation in C++ and other implementations build off of it. Like the Java implementation is standalone. It's not built on top of it. Same with the Go and all of that. So, and even Python, like there's no real Python wrappers around. I don't remember, did the C++ Substrate stuff get linked into Python at all ever or not?
It never got it linked in there. The biggest problem was getting the Python to getting it packaged in a way that wouldn't really break the Python release process.
Yeah, so I think that's one thing we ran into a little bit with the text format. It's just that it's like hard because it's like a 0 to 1 problem because no one is linking against the C++ stuff already. Adding a new feature by pulling it in from the C++ library is a big task. But if you were to go that route, then I would just suggest thinking of like a visitor is going to be a hard feature to export outside of C++.
Right.
But I don't know if these exist or not. I know it exists for XML, which is something completely different. But like XML has a language that you can use to apply transformations to an XML document. So,
Right. Okay.
if you were to implement a library that walked a substrate plan and transformed it using some kind of data language, that might be more portable. But you certainly don't have to. I mean, you just do it for your own purposes. It's just like a
Right.
general thought of, if you add a C++ feature that's generally useful today, there's not a big audience for it at the moment, but there may be someday.
Sounds good.
I'm not trying to actively discourage you, even though
No,
it
no, I
sounds-
know. It's all good. It's good feedback. Yeah.
I think the overall aim is that the libraries will eventually have like rich capabilities in all of them. I think the Substrate Java one's the furthest ahead because we use it with calcite, so there's a lot of work to like be able to infer types relations and various things. I think eventually we would like to get there with all of them, but it's I don't know enough about the C++ side of things to know like how that would work. But I know
Are there transformation tools in other implementations that could be used as a example or template to follow?
I have some transformations that I wrote as part of the Spark Gateway, Substrate Spark Gateway that they're basically just visitors with extra logic. They're not. Yeah, they're not reusable or customizable. They're just specific. They're standalone operations, like replace all the virtual tables with name tables.
what kind of transformations are you thinking of, Weston?
It's like calcite rules.
Okay, I guess that's what I was gonna say. Like the way we do that is we just transform it to calcite and use calcite, which is designed to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's having spent some time on this recently myself. I think that's probably the best example of something that exists already, as far as I know, because it's basically a pluggable framework for translations, and you define the translations independently, and then you hand them to the framework to do the work. And the heuristic optimizer that calcite has is basically apply all the transformations until no more transformations occur.
Right.
So you don't have to worry about the ordering of the transformations either. So if you're transforming two different things, they'll fire in whatever order, and then the other one will fire again if it needs to.
Yeah, and speaking of that specific thing, I'm planning on giving a talk at the calcite meetup in like 3 weeks where I'm going to talk about how we do exactly that. And I'm trying to I'm in the process of making a repo example of like wiring all that stuff up that'll actually work. That's currently living in it'll probably currently live at my GitHub, but I think it might make sense to live in the Substrate repo at some point as an example of like, hey, how do you use calcite, or how do you feed plans to the calcite for planning and then export them as a thing, as a more like written for example. And that's actually what's driving a lot of my like Substrate Java annoyance ergonomics things circling all the way back. It's like I'm doing that from scratch, not looking at work stuff. And it's been like, why is this substrate to calcite and then substrate relevant? Is it really the other way around? It's like names. You have a question, Jax?
I was just going to say that I'm curious if you're using the HEP.
I'm using the Volcano planner for it. It's
Are
not
you
a
trying to
particular
cost?
Not really.
Okay, I might suggest you use the HEP planner then, just to not send people down other paths, because the HEP planner, as far as if I recall correctly, doesn't even consider cost. It's just heuristic. It runs everything until it can't run. It might be better.
I could switch the planner up. The thing I'm more interested in being is like, hey, like here's how you set up, like get your logical plan, set up your system conventions to be like, here's my Postgres, here's my Elasticsearch, here's my whatever, build it up, send it off to Trino or Data Fusion or whatever, and various ways to encode plans for like, oh, this subset can run on Postgres, so just make a Postgres query in calcite. Data Fusion understands Substrate, so give it a Substrate plan. TBD for other things that you might want to do. It's not intended to be like how to use calcite as much as like how to wire it in, and if you want to get really into planning, then yeah.
That's cool.
Cool. I'll look into that. All right. Thank you.
Anything else we want to talk about?
Are the test case issues fixed in core now? Can we?
Oh, that's right, Victor. There were several patches to try to fix some of the things you wanted fixed, not all of them. But have you had more success, or have you looked at it since?
I haven't looked at it since. The one thing I think we didn't figure out, or did we figure out if we wanted to make the descriptions optional or not?
We did not make it. We did not make a change to change the behavior.
So descriptions currently are still required.
Yeah,
Oh,
they're
that's
still
fine.
required. Nobody. Yeah, there has been no discussion, so I don't think there has been a decision.
I think that was like the one thing that I was kind of, yeah, I think that will let us fix a lot of stuff in theory, is like once we decide whether there should be or not, then we can either fix the test or fix the parser. I think my rationale for making it optional was that a lot of the tests for like really basic stuff was like description, basic test. I'm like, cool, like I don't need that many.
Yeah, and whereas I actually use the fact that it says basic in order to as part of when I'm processing all the tests.
Like what do you use
But you
the
could just
basic text
use.
for?
I mean, like, as long as there's a default value for which that we assume that it's fine.
I think
I
for
could-
Python, I had to return the empty string in the parser when it didn't encounter it.
or empty string or generic or something. But yeah, and it's like, but yeah, it's good because otherwise you end up with one big file. And it's like, okay, which test was this that failed? The 9th test in here, or is it the 3rd basic test? Is a lot easier to find than the 9th file, the 9th test overall.
I mean, I would argue that if you have a thing with like 9 files, then you might need more blocks anyways. Like I think it's more of a problem if you have like 200 tests and there's no descriptions at all. That's a different problem.
Yeah, the other way that people do it, I mean, and in some of the tests I've seen at the end of they're 15, 20 or something. The other way I've seen people do it is they just say, okay, the test is the name of is the actual string that was used in the test. So you end up doing you have to do a string search, which is possible. Just not the way I use it currently.
Yeah. Like I have a preference for it being optional just because it feels pointless to have like a free line test where like half of it is like putting a description in where we don't need it. What I looked at was
I think you should just push it forward. I don't think anybody's gonna. I don't know.
Okay.
David might be the
No.
one who's gonna affect it the most. I can't predict that. But,
Yeah.
I mean,
and I could
was
just,
surprised
I could
it was
just fill in a
required.
value, so I think that's fine.
yeah, okay. No, I'll push that forward then. And then I'll see if
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you could be our guinea pig again and see whether or not we fixed the shit that was making you pull your hair out, that'd be great.
I might give that a I might have to do it. I might get my PR in. I don't know if I'm gonna have. Oh, I guess actually on that PR, I also had a PR to make it. The generation wasn't. We were like formatting the generated antler parser and various other things. I have my address line issues PR also has some machinery and some documentation around how to generate them more cleanly. I think David, you have some comments that are open on that I need to fix. I can try testing it locally. I'm not looking at my work stuff. These things I'm on leave, but I'm trying to map some machines, see what happens.
All right, cool.
Cool.
Well, one of us else, maybe Weston will be a guinea pig at some point. I want to add a function test. It'll be like, yeah, I just feel like the problem is that the developers that build something then go test it, it never is a good test.
I think just also general, like going from like no Python to like, oh, this now has Python in it. It's like, oh boy.
Oh
now
yeah,
we've got Python and
like,
stuff that doesn't have Python.
there's a long page in our internal Notion about like how to clean up your Mac OS Python because it's a fucking shit show.
I mean, honestly, at that point, I might just be like, cool, I'm gonna add a pip-end file. It's like, cool, use one of the whatever Python environment managers now.
The solution I have is pretty simple. Hey, Doc, can I have another laptop?
Every time.
Python. Fucking Python is so broken on Mac. I mean, I think it's just so broken, and Mac just makes it worse. Yeah. Anyway,
You switch between two laptops.
I'm going to tell you right now, Weston doesn't miss Python. He's happy in Rust.
Yeah, Python and Rust are tied together at the hip.
Are they?
Uh,
I feel like Rust can walk away quite happy. I think Python's the one that's got the
Yeah.
dependency there.
yeah.
Python's trying to tie itself to Rust, maybe.
Well, no, it can't because then it would lose all its users.
That's true.
I would bet there are more users of what's that package called? Polars than there are of any Rust crate.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Except
All right. Anything else we want to talk about
indirectly build Linux stuff.
besides the greatness of Python and Rust?
I think that's it.
All right. Have a good week, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Minute 5.
Have a good week.